Welcome to the new studio.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a new studio, listener.
It's like the damping.
I like the damping. Not only do I like the damping, I like the fact I'm sat in a camping chair. It feels like I'm at Glastonbury reporting on.
I should probably take
BBC
take
Three.
a picture of this just so
well,
that.
If you're going to do that, let me just smart myself up a bit.
Just so the.
So it doesn't look like we're recording this on the hottest effing day of the year.
Just so our listeners know.
Look at this.
How high tech we are.
How professional this has become.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yes,
That's the picture. Excellent.
Enough of that. But
that's Scott,
usual,
by the way, in the picture.
As per usual, my equipment's failing.
All right.
Yes, we not only are here on the hottest day, but we're going to try to do 7 albums rather than 6 because that was a really good idea.
That was a really good idea, wasn't it?
At the time. So we've got new albums on Cresent, Stone Age, Black Sabbath, Transplants, Tunstall, Camera Obscura, Disclosure, and Pet Shop Boys. So without further ado,
let's just roll.
Queens of the Stone Age, like Clockwork. Peter.
I really like this album, and that was only after a second listen. To be frank with you, I found, and I don't know whether it's the heat, but I have to say this particular collection of albums that we're about to talk about presented various challenges. But the first album I listened to was Queens of the Stone Age, like Clockwork. I have to say, it's all right. It's quite. No, I am rushing now. I need to slow down. It's quite a melodic album in places. It's not full on rock or full on metal or whatever your conceptions are of what is a quintessential Queens and Stone Age album, but it's quite short, so it was a good listen.
It is short, actually.
It is quite short, and it had a fairly good mix of sort of rockers or alt rock numbers and a few of quieter ballady numbers as well. And my general observation of the album is that whilst many people have said of the influence that Josh Homme has had on the Arctic Monkeys, for example,
yeah.
I wonder if we're beginning to see a bit of a splashback, pardon the phrase, of the Arctic Monkeys on Queens of the Stone Age. There was that sort of indie vibe running through it that perhaps has been there previously, but was highlighted on this particular record.
Yeah, I think Alex Turner is one of the many guest vocalists on the album. I think
he's on there somewhere.
I think If I Had a Tail, although no doubt someone will correct me. Yeah, I thought I was the same. This is in common with an album we'll get to later, or perhaps not too later. It took me a few listens for this to really gel with me. A couple of tracks aside, it wasn't really grabbing me from the off the way the previous album.
Albums by them?
Yeah, previous album, Era Vulgaris, which kind of hit me straight away. So this has taken me, I think it takes repeat listens to kind of get into. When you do that, I think, as you say, there's some stuff that's your kind of typical Queens of the Stone Age kind of stuff. So rock songs with melodic bits and jaggy bits and great hooks. So I Sat by the Ocean, My God is the Sun, I Appear Missing, fine examples of that. Then you've got bizarre things, or slightly more bizarre things like Calopsia, which starts off with this kind of 60s kind of thing, and then kind of morphs into a kind of Ziggy Stardust, Bowie rock song.
Yeah, and Bowie, Fairweather Friends, there's a real Bowie-like vocal in there as well.
Yeah,
Fairweather Friends.
Fairweather Friends has not only Mark Lanigan in it, returning to the fray for one song, but also, of course, Elton John on piano. And
really?
vocals.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So my 70s, 80s ear was tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also Trent Reznor appears in the album, Jake Shear appears in the album, Mrs. Homme, Brody Dahl appears on the album.
Hey.
I think the original idea was that Trent was possibly going to produce.
He's a busy man.
I think they didn't see quite eye to eye on the production thing. However,
I'll imagine why.
However, he does appear on Calopsia and Fairweather Friends.
Oh, right. I didn't know that. There you go.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those classics. But if you are a Queens of Stone Age fan, I think you're gonna you're gonna like it. And of all kind of rock bands, hard rock bands that have come out in the last kind of couple of decades, they are, I still think, one of the more interesting ones musically.
I agree.
So, moving on.
Have you got a new carpet in here?
I have got a new carpet in here.
I can smell it. I love that new carpet now.
Yeah. It's almost clean in here.
It's almost clean. This is like the cleanest it's been in like 3 years.
Yeah, I know. Speaking of clean.
Sorry.
The clean sound of heavy metal back to the 70s. Except not, but yes.
Yeah.
And the new Black Sabbath album. First time the original members, or at least 3 of the original members, have been back together for a studio album since 78.
Yep.
Album's called 13 because it's the 13th album, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was expecting this to be awful. Well, not awful, but I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I actually do. I think the first few big power chords on the opening track, end of the beginning, I think you kind of know where you are immediately. You kind of that kind of heavy, literally that kind of heavy guitar sound that's been, used and ripped off by the likes of Queen of the Stone Age, Metallica, and most of the modern rock bands, really. And also, I kind of like the almost kind of a slide opening couplet of is this the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, which I think is a nice lyric. It's like, are they going to make another album, or is this the last kind of album that the original Sabbath lineup will make? So I think the opening song's a really, really good track. I think it follows up with God Is Dead, which I think is another classic kind of Sabbath thing with big guitars and drums. An instant classic, dare I say. And the rest of the album is pretty solid, has to be said. I think you've got some decent straight-out rockers like Loner, Age of Reason, mixed with kind of a nice little ballad, Zeitgeist, with a really nice guitar solo. And then I think there's a really good kind of classic kind of blues riff with it on a Damaged Soul, which I really like, just towards the end of the album. And the final track on the normal version of the album, as opposed to the ultra extended thing, which are always is yes, exactly. Is Dear Father, which is a nice song about priests and paedophilia. Where you've got lines like, "You preyed upon my flesh, then prayed for my soul.
Oh yes.
Belief betrayed my lust, the faith that you stole," which I quite liked. I actually think if you stick to that, it's actually not a bad album.
Yeah.
I think the 3 tracks that follow it, Methodemic, Peace of Mind, and Pariah, whilst Pariah does contain a great riff, I think they are weaker than the preceding tracks, and I wouldn't particularly count them as part of the album.
I could agree strongly with that last statement. I could agree with also with a lot of what you've said on this. It's a solid album. I was going to try and get through this podcast without saying it. No, it's a solid metal album. As you know, my penchant for the metal. However, I've disproved my penchant for the metal over the last few years.
Should make it more on a similar tone later on in the podcast.
Yes. Over the years, I have disproved my penchant. I've actually, an admirer of the metal. The elements are all there. It's a very clean sound.
Rick Rubin.
Yeah. Really? Has Rubenised them?
Yeah.
Okay. So, very clean sound. Very sort of the base camp for metal. It's very much what you would expect a Black Sabbath album to sound like. This could have been recorded in the 1970s, to be honest with you.
Yes.
But that's
I wouldn't disagree.
But not to detract from that. Some great guitar work, especially some great drum work. I think you've already said that, though. My only gripe with it was a little bit in the sort of same ballpark in terms of the theme all the way through. But then again, if you're a Black Sabbath fan, you'll be very content with this record. I made the mistake of listening to the extended version, which means that by the end of the album, my view of the album as a whole had perhaps shifted unfairly towards the negative.
I also think part of that problem is actually partly down to Mr. Rubin, because I think the album's been mastered. It doesn't say badly as such, but I think because it's been compressed quite a lot, it means there's not a lot of space for the guitars and stuff. So if you listen to the whole thing, and particularly the extended thing, and particularly in headphones, I think it becomes a bit of a chore.
Okay.
get through, because it's too much of a muchness, and you're not getting any light and dark. No pun intended from a metal kind of point of view, but you aren't getting that in the kind of mix.
Yeah.
And I think that your brain finds it hard to.
That's a very good point, because actually, on the first listen of this album, I thought it did just sound all the same level, not just musically, but not musically,
that's pretty much what I'm saying,
but all the same. And that was a very difficult sort of session to listen to. But you've made a very good point now in terms of how this album should be listened to. Is through loudspeakers.
Indeed.
Right.
Speaking of loud music, we've come to the third and final of our kind of rock trio.
Oh yeah.
This is the third album from the Transplants, which is the side project of Rancid's Tim Armstrong and Blink-182's
Really?
Travis Barker. Follows up from their first album, which came out in 2002, self-titled debut album, and then there was a follow-up in 2004.
Right.
And they haven't done anything since this one.
Right.
The question is, should they have bothered doing this one?
Tricky, because I actually thought it had quite a strong start. The first few tracks. All right, let's take In a Warzone to one side. The first few tracks after the opening track were, I actually thought, were very good. See It to Believe It and Come Around in particular. I thought, oh, this is quite a good album. This, it's got the thrash, it's got the metal, it's got the rock, it's got the alt rock.
Yeah.
Alternative sound. But then I thought, as the album went on, it again just sounded a little bit all the same. Not very much, not as creative as that first burst of energy that you get in the first sort of third of the album. Although, hats off to anyone that manages to sample Neville Chamberlain's Declaration of War.
This is true. Yes, that is quite
bonus
impressive.
point for that.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I loved their debut album. Debut album was great. It had brilliant songs, Torn Cans in the Air, DJ Sad But True, and Diamonds and Guns, which obviously featured in a hair product advert not too long afterwards. The follow-up album was a bit by comparison, and I think this is pretty much the same. It kind of feels a bit tired and lacking in new ideas, really, and particularly lacking any ideas that you wouldn't already find on maybe a Rancid album or a Blink-182 album.
It's not different enough, really, from those bands,
which is not to say that it's bad as such. It's just a bit underwhelming. I mean, I'm the same with you. I think See It to Believe It is a fine punk pop song.
Yes.
And I also quite liked it when they tried to be a bit more expansive, which they did in the first couple of albums as well. So with something different, with the guest raps from Bun B and Equipto, neither of whom I'd heard of before, I have to confess. And I also liked the kind of Dick Dale sampling on It's a Problem. So I kind of that whole guitar thing.
Yeah.
So that was alright, but overall I would just say download the first album, Transplants. That's really good. The other two albums, not really worth bothering about.
Okay.
Moving swiftly on.
And turning the volume down.
Yes, indeed, turning the volume down. We come to Katie Tunstall's latest album, Invisible Empire Crescent Moon. Apparently the story behind that is the fact that it was recorded in two sessions a few months apart. So the first session was meant to be a kind of reflection on death and loss. She lost her father last year, and the second more to do with reflecting on personal life in general following the separation from herself and her as then husband, who was also a person in the band. So that's the kind of story behind it.
Right.
Again, like I said with Queens of Stone Age, this is one of those albums where, until last night, and despite being a Katie Tunstall fan, I was actually ready to give it a bit of kicking. Because on the first two listens, it just kind of floated by in a kind of haze of bland nothingness. And I kind of was starting to wonder what had happened to the person that made Eye of the Telescope and Drastic Fantastic several years ago. But I have to say, on the third listen, and to quote the lady herself, I had a suddenly I see moment.
Oh!
And the subtleties of the album started to open up to me more than they had to before. I mean, it's a very sparse and understated record, with simple, but I think at times quite effective arrangements. So I think, on tracks such as How You Kill Me, there's a nice kind of smoky jazz tone to her voice that I hadn't heard before, which I quite liked. duet with the producer Huey Gelb. On chimes, I thought was really nice. Is it Feel It All? Is a really good poppy tune.
It ends on a poppy,
with nice reverb guitar, and also like the kind of clarinet in the song Honeydew, which I thought was really nice. So I thought it was a nice record, half of it kind of quality material, most of which would seem to me to be on the kind of latter part, so on the Crescent Moon side. But overall it's let down by too many average songs getting in the way of it really flowing.
Yeah. Well, I was all ready to slate it too until you gave me some of the background there on her own life experience for the last couple of years, so now I feel awful. No, I can again agree completely. The Crescent Moon half is the better half, as it were, of the record. Again, it was all of a tone, all of a bit like the Black Sabbath album, all of a certain level, only very, very, very quiet all the way through, which did, like yourself, make me wonder what happened to. But as you say, some songs on there where she is able to sing in perhaps an unexpected style, as to previous Casey Tunstall albums, and actually when you go back and listen to it again, a pleasant if quiet listen. So it's one that you've got to try. You've got to give it a couple of listens at least for it to sort of seep in and take a hold, because otherwise you will sort of walk away from this thinking, what a disappointment.
And you have to sit down and listen to it as well.
Yes, you can't be doing, not that we're doing other things when we're doing these things. Usually I'm just staring out of a train window, so that helps. That's good. That's get some scenery in there, but nothing too distracting there, because you need to sort of pay attention to the modulation of the songs on this. So yeah, second half better than first half.
So moving on, I'm staying in Scotland. In fact, we have latest album from Camera Obscura, who have one of these bands that I suppose have been in the kind of shadow of Belle and Sebastian really for
quite a long time now.
Quite a long time, yeah. And they used to have the same thing of obviously the dual male-female vocal, but the guy that was in the band, John Henderson, I think his name was, left a few albums ago, so it's now just Tracy Ann Campbell doing stuff. And I think it's fair to say this is along similar lines as the Katie Tunstall album in feel, would you say?
Well, yeah. I'd say it's got a slightly livelier feel in part than the Katie Tunstall album. Whilst, again, sort of one of the quieter albums that we've reviewed this year, it has, I think it has more engaging than Katie Tunstall album, to be quite honest with you. I found that listening to this album, I could sort of get into the songs a little bit more, if that makes sense. It was the lyrics on some of the songs were more engaging. I could listen to New Year's Resolution, for example, and know exactly what she was thinking or saying at that point.
It's one of the better tracks on the album.
And it is one of the stronger tracks on the album. And there's another track on the album, I don't know if it's This Is Love or one of the others, it's been playing regularly on the radio as well. So perhaps one or two more pop moments in here than the Katie Tunstall album. That's not to detract from the Katie Tunstall album, but this was a more engaging listen.
I'm kind of understand this one, because this is an album I was quite looking forward to, because I quite liked the two previous albums, Let's Get Out of the Country, and particularly 2009's My Maudlin Career, which I thought was perfected the art of kind of country folk tinge Scot pop, if you like. But I struggled with this one, has to be said. Apart from things like New Year's Resolution, Do It Again, which reminded me of early Lone Justice, and Break It Gently, which had hints of maybe 10,000 Maniacs type thing. I felt the rest of it felt a bit kind of flat for me. So I kind of thought it kind of meandered its way through its playing time without really doing enough to leave a lasting impression. Which, speaking of somebody that's, I wouldn't say because I'm a fan of the band necessarily, but someone that's always quite liked the band, I actually thought this was probably their weakest release in their last three. So I was a bit kind of...
that is a shame. As a relative novice, I quite enjoyed it.
So, in our race to get to the pub, and get out to a really
race
hot
to get
room.
to somewhere really cold.
We get our dancing shoes on.
Yay! Not literally, because we can't move.
And we settle in for some disclosure. Who are Guy and Howard Lawrence.
Right.
And I can disclose that I found this album dull, drab, dreary. This is really...
Do you want to expand on that?
Oh yeah, I want to expand on that. This is a band that seems to have kind of just plundered Todd Terry's back catalogue and come up with a selection of tedious wannabe 80s house tunes that either go on forever or, in the case of Stimulation, just feel like they go on forever. And, there are a couple of moments in the album where it seems to me there's a good song trying to make an effort to make a run for it. So on maybe You and Me Voices January, for example. But for me, the Lawrence brothers managed to beat them and hi-hat them to death to ensure that doesn't actually happen.
There's a very, as you said, late 80s, early mid-90s garage, UK garage sound to this. And it was never a particular subgenre of house music that I was into, I have to confess. And as you say, it's not always an easy listen of an album. It's one of those you can kind of put it on in the background quietly, and it's good to have on, and it might even tap your toe. Not in your case.
No.
I thought it had some interesting ideas. I actually liked one of the tracks. I actually quite liked White Noise, which I thought had a real sort of. I think when it let me clarify. I think when the album was stronger, or when the highlights of the album occur, it's tracks like White Noise where they actually take not just the sort of the plodding of garage, but then actually added something to it, and there was a kind of 80s riff. Oh, going to come to this on the next album. There was kind of an 80s riff running through it as well, which sort of gave it a little bit of character. Plus, they had a guest female vocalist, Luna George, on that.
Luna Francis,
Luna on that album as well.
I agree with that. I suppose White Noise is all right, but I think again, it's kind of supposed to vocal thing. I think the song itself is all right, and whether you like the track or not is probably more to do with whether you like the kind of slightly whiny little girl voice that she has, which I think if you remember when we reviewed them on the BBC thing, I stressed that was a thing that kind of didn't appeal to me for Luna George. I found her vocals kind of got on my nerves after a bit. Same thing kind of happened here. For me, it seems to be at the moment, reading around, that the accepted line at the moment is that they're the saviours of dance music. Which, if that's true, I find that quite depressing myself. In the words of the band themselves, when the fire starts to burn, make sure you throw your copy of this album on it.
Oh. You've not liked this album, have you?
I think it's fair to say it's my least favourite of the ones.
I don't think you've been that critical for quite a while. No, it had in a final. I don't know why I'm defending this album. I didn't enjoy it either. I didn't enjoy it either, to be honest with you. But I could sort of see where it's coming from. It features our old friend Jamie Woon as well. Jamie Woon?
Yeah, January.
January. That's a good track.
I said January was one of the few times there was a song trying to fight its way out of their production.
Yeah, and even F for You was okay. But okay. I have to confess, not the most engaging album of the podcast. No, not even close.
No.
Okay.
Which leaves us with Pet Shop Boys' umpteenth album.
12th.
There you go.
Not as many as Black Sabbath.
Well,
There's time.
They haven't been split up yet.
No, they haven't.
And more than that, the second album in 12 months.
Yes. You usually have to wait for
about
3 or 4 years.
About 30 if you can count that thing that was them that wasn't them. The soundtracky thing.
Yeah, okay. I know. Yeah, the ballet.
Yeah, the ballet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, third album in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
No.
So anyway, this apparently is. Regular listeners will remember that I didn't mind their album of last year. Only to read that apparently that wasn't actually a very good album, and this was a return to form.
It depends what you're reading. I'm not going to fall into the trap, he said, of reviewing the last album as part of my review for this album, which seems one or two notable music critics have done. They've given this album glowing reviews, but only by sort of building on the faults in the previous album. I actually thought the previous album was a classic in the making, and I think I said that at the time.
Yes. And
we will be reflecting back on that someday as...
Except for Winner, obviously. As
a latter-day behaviour. This album has just got to number 3.
Whey!
Which I think is their biggest chart success for an album in about 20 years. Which I think is unfair on some of the albums from the mid-last decade, like Fundamental, for example.
Yeah.
And Yes, whilst I found Yes a bit commercial, a bit poppy for me, it had its... Again, it was a good, solid Pet Shop Boys album. This album is different. It feels like a release of energy. After 28 years with Parlophone, they have gone their separate ways. They have got their own... they've got their own arrangement now, but they have their own... This album's on their own label. So there is a definite shift in terms of the production, in terms of a sort of an energy or a theme that runs behind the album. It's very much... another comparison some of the critics made is very much what the Daft Punk album wasn't, which is a fresher electronic sounding album, as opposed to a purely retrospective album. Now, I really did like and still continue to listen to the Daft Punk album, so I've no problem with that. But this is very much, I suppose, what the Daft Punk album could have been, particularly in moments like Axis.
Yes, my favourite song on the album.
The instrumental that sort of preceded the album, which is an absolutely brilliant blinder of an instrumental track.
I agree, and funny you mentioned Daft Punk there, because obviously in that particular track, it manages to give a not so subtle nod to Chic's "I Want Your Love."
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Of course. And on one or two of the other more instrumental tracks of the album, again, that sort of rises to the surface. For me, of course, there are songs on here as well. We wouldn't expect anything less. Whilst I'm going to deal with my only sort of criticism of the album is they set out for this album to be very banging.
It is banging.
Facing criticism from the last album, in which case there was no banging or lasers. There are times when the Stuart Price production, which is otherwise excellent, is too banging. It's just too damn loud. It's like listening to a Batman film, the music's just there over the top of everything. But other than that, I think this is an excellent album. It's a real return to form. No, they've never been away. It's not even a comeback. I think it is probably one of their best albums in a long time. That's not to say that as a super fan, I don't sort of have my sort of things with it. One of which I've mentioned. I won't mention any others because I know you probably will. My favourite tracks of the album: "Love Is a Bourgeois Construct" and probably "Inside a Dream," which has a real nice 80s cowbell riff somewhere in the middle. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Okay.
I also like vocal, but I'll let you tackle vocal.
I don't mind vocal.
I like vocal.
Either.
That was the single.
And although amusingly, it does use some of the same cliche dance beats that I was criticising Disclosure for using. However, seemingly to me in a more kind of knowing and
it was more of a nod
way rather than a I don't know.
Yes.
I may be being unfair to Disclosure. I don't think I am. But
it was more of a nostalgic sort of look.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like this album as much as I liked last year's one.
Right.
However,
I suggest you did like it though.
Yeah, I thought it was fine.
Yes,
I said Axis, as I say, when it came out, I like a lot. As you say, partly might be just because it's essentially an instrumental track, so it means that I don't have the Neil Tennant vocal issue going on. Because he's in there, but slightly kind of computerised, so that's not really an issue. Elsewhere, there's an interesting cover of Springsteen's "Last to Die" off his Magic album of a few years ago.
I left you to cover that.
As you say, you've got Love is a Bourgeois Construct, which is almost a great track. I mean, it is classic Pet Shop Boys.
It's classic
both
Pet Shop Boys.
lyrically and
Yeah,
musically. I mean, it's one of those Pet Shop Boys songs that could have come from
Yep.
pretty much any period of Pet Shop Boys, give or take.
But-
But what ruins it for me
No.
is the lift from Henry Purcell's King Arthur,
Right.
which is a horrible piece of music, full stop, and kind of just pervades the whole thing. And the kind of sporadic kind of go west choir, as I'll call
Well,
them.
I think those are two things that make it. Because what this album has been described as techno meets disco, and I think that whole Henry Purcell riff, it's such a naff bourgeois tune, and
Yeah, perhaps,
and
yeah,
you're dealing with such a disappointed bourgeois character in there, and the more you listen, because it's quite a long song, it tells quite a story in itself, and actually you feel empathy for the character because it's quite a sad story by the end. But I think that just sits quite nicely, and also it has that sort of back to back, cheesy disco, so back to bark, sound from Saturday Night Fever. Dun-dun-dun-dun.
No, I suppose, yeah.
So it's a little nod to
Yeah, I mean,
disco.
there are a few other
Yeah.
nods on the album. There's parts of Fluorescent where I kept having to fight back the urge to sing We Fade to Grey along with
I
bits
think
of it.
that, again, a deliberate nod to Fade to Grey.
The worst track on the album is quite clearly Thursday,
All right. Oh, gosh.
with
Example.
Example.
Our old friend Example.
Example, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's bad enough before he comes in, but as soon as he comes in, it gets even worse.
I quite like those.
Yeah. and then obviously I can't leave the review without mentioning Bolshe, which is just one of those just so bad and annoying that I was singing to work today kind of songs. And this is guilty again of recycling house beats that I give disclosure of, by embarrassing myself and my entire family to admit that I quite like this one. Even its nods at Axel F.
Really? Alright, okay. No, fair enough.
But yeah, overall, I thought an okay record.
I obviously love this album, and despite the pressures of listening to 7 hours of the podcast, I've somehow found the time to listen to this about 5 or 6 times on loop. No, I'm so proud of them this week, this year, in fact.
Well,
I'm going to end there before I say anything else.
Yeah, maybe there'll be a royal baby Neil or Chris
Of course, by the time you listen to this, you'll know the answer to that.
or Ozzy. Ozzy Windsor.
Aussie Neil Chris Windsor.
You heard it here first.
Oh,
Till next time.
Check out our website at cttbmusic.co.uk. Also, follow us on Twitter at cttbmusic. The CTTB Music Podcast is a Vineland production.